I was never meant to be alone that night. If things had gone the way they were supposed to, Rowan would have been right there beside me, snoring softly, his arm slung over my shoulder the way it always did when he wanted to keep me close, his steady breath syncing with the lazy tick of the old wall clock in the hall. That was the picture I held in my head, the one that should have been real. But life doesn't always give you the picture you expect. My name is Widom, 24 years old, 8 months pregnant, and tucked away in a weather-worn farmhouse at the far edge of Briar Hollow, Pennsylvania. The house had a story etched into its very bones. I knew that the first time I laid eyes on it. The wood siding was gray and brittle like old parchment, shingles sagged with years of storms, and the trees crowded in tight, hemming the place in as if they'd been posted there on watch. We moved in late last spring, desperate for space and privacy. Rent was cheap, too cheap, and after years of squeezing into apartments with paper-thin walls and neighbors always on the other side, the thought of a nursery, a garden, and silence felt like freedom. Rowan had loved it instantly. I remember him standing in the yard on that first visit, hands on his hips, breathing it all in. "It's quiet," he'd said, almost grinning, like the world's been turned down a few notches. And he was right. It was quiet, but sometimes too quiet, like the silence pressed into your ears until you thought you could hear your own blood moving. When I found out I was pregnant, we'd only been married 9 months. We had always talked about kids someday, but life didn't ask permission, it just arrived. We were still learning each other's rhythms, Rowan's bluntness when he was tired, my tendency to overthink, the way small arguments could stretch too long. He worked long days at the sawmill, came home exhausted, smelling of sawdust and sweat, which left me with hours upon hours of solitude. I tried to fill them with projects. I sewed curtains for the nursery, rubbed oil into the rocking chair I'd rescued from a flea market, folded and refolded tiny socks and onesies in neat color-coded piles. We already had a name picked out for our daughter, Marina Loan Witom. Sometimes I'd whisper it into the empty nursery like I was training the walls to recognize her, letting the name breathe life into the space before she did. The people in Briar Hollow were kind enough, though they kept to themselves. My nearest neighbor, Mrs. Evers, a widow in her 70s, lived half a mile down the road. She'd appear once a week at my door with a tin of muffins or a tidbit of local gossip, always with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Outside of her, there wasn't much human contact. At first, I relished the quiet. After growing up in a city where privacy was rare and every wall carried noise, the solitude felt protective, like a cocoon before motherhood. But when summer slipped into fall, the quiet shifted. At night, when the wind stilled, I'd hear it, the crunch of leaves underfoot, slow and deliberate, circling the house. The first time, I told myself it was deer. The second, that it was in my head. By the third, I was double-locking the doors even in broad daylight, checking the latches twice before I let myself breathe. It was late October, a Tuesday. Rowan called just after 5, his voice rough with fatigue. "There's been a breakdown at the mill," he said. "I've got to stay and help fix it. Might be late." "How late?" I asked, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. "After midnight. Maybe 1. I hesitated. "Okay, just call me before you head home, all right?" "I promise," he said, and I could almost hear the tired smile in his voice. Dinner was simple, a baked potato buried under cheese with steamed vegetables on the side. I ate slowly, flipping through a pregnancy magazine I'd already read cover to cover twice. Marin kicked as I chewed, sharp enough to make me flinch. I laid a hand against the swell of my stomach, whispering, "Easy, little wave." That was my name for her when she moved, my little wave. By 9, I was upstairs, propped against pillows, reading in bed. The wind outside scraped through the last of the leaves, and the farmhouse seemed to float on the blackness like a lone ship creaking in endless water. Sometime after 11, my eyelids sagged, and I slipped under. What woke me wasn't a noise. It was a feeling, that primal, animal jolt that shudders through your body before your mind has words for it. A warning, raw and instinctive, that something was different in the room, something that didn't belong. I blinked into the dark, the glow of my phone searing my eyes. 4:14 a.m. For a moment I thought maybe it was just the baby shifting that had jolted me awake. Then it came again, 3 faint taps. Not on the front door, lower, softer, on the living room window downstairs. I froze. My heartbeat surged, so hard it pressed against my ribs and knotted my stomach. Slowly I slid out of bed, careful not to jar my aching hips, and crept into the upstairs hallway. From the window there, I had a clear view of the yard. The moonlight lay pale across the grass, washing everything silver. At first, nothing. Just trees standing like black columns. Then, movement. A figure stepped from the shadow of the old maple tree. A man. He didn't move, didn't wave or call out. Just stood there, head tilted back toward me. His clothes were dark, soaked with rain, clinging to him. Even from the second floor I felt it, his eyes locking onto mine. A heavy, unshakable certainty. I stumbled back from the glass, heart hammering, grabbed my phone and punched 911. The line clicked. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, rehearsed. There's a man in my yard, I whispered, crouching low by the wall. I'm pregnant and I'm alone. My husband's at work. Please just send someone. She began her list of questions, description, address, whether he had a weapon. I tried to answer, but then a voice, low, deliberate, from outside. Wait, Tom, I know you're awake. The phone nearly slipped from my hands. My knees buckled under me. He'd said my name. I hadn't told him my name. The operator's tone sharpened. Ma'am, stay on the line. Get somewhere safe now. I staggered into the bedroom closet, easing the door shut, pressing myself against the wall as though I could melt into it. My breathing roared in the phone's receiver. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, climbing the porch. A squeak of the handle. My blood iced. The sound shifted. He wasn't outside anymore. The entryway boards groaned. The same ones I crossed every single day. My skin prickled as the air inside the closet seemed to thin, shrinking around me. Then came the stairs, each step groaning under his weight, dragging him closer. My fingers crushed the phone, knuckles burning white. He's inside, I whispered to the operator. Please, he's inside. Deputies are minutes away, just hold on, she said. Minutes. Minutes stretched into forever when someone was walking toward you. The steps stopped outside the bedroom. Silence. Long, suffocating silence. Then, a laugh. Wet, too soft, too close. You shouldn't be alone out here. The closet handle twitched. My breath caught in my throat. Then from outside, faint but growing, sirens. The sound sliced through the house. The handle stilled. The steps retreated fast this time. A door slammed. Moments later, voices filled the house, firm, commanding, steady. Deputies. When they pulled me out of the closet, my legs barely held me. I saw them then, the muddy footprints. They began at the porch, trailed through the living room, climbed the stairs, and stopped right where I'd been hiding. The deputies searched the house, the yard, the woods. But he was gone. For days afterward, I barely slept. Every creak, every shifting shadow made my pulse race. Rowan offered to take time off work, but we couldn't afford it. Then, one rainy afternoon, Mrs. Evers appeared on my doorstep, clutching the local paper. Her face was pale, her voice tight. Have you seen this? On the front page, a mugshot. Bram Lutchford, 31. Arrested for abducting and murdering a young woman from 2 towns over. The article said he'd been scouting rural homes, targeting women who were alone, especially pregnant women. My stomach twisted. The face staring back from that grainy photo. It was him. Within a month, Rowan and I packed up and left Briar Hollow. We found a cramped apartment above a bakery in a busier town, noise filling every corner. When Marin was born, I swore I'd never let her feel unsafe in her own home. But sometimes, when the night is too still and the world sinks into silence, I still hear it. 3 soft taps, and a voice, low and certain, whispering my name. I was 23 in the summer of 2018, and for the first time in my life I thought maybe, just maybe, I had things under control. Not in some shiny, Instagram-perfect way. We didn't have a house or money tucked away in savings. But rent was covered, we had a couch that wasn't from the curb, and dinner wasn't always instant noodles. In Sunland, Tujunga, that was enough to feel like winning. I'd grown up in Eagle Rock, the youngest of 3 boys crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment where the walls felt thinner than paper. My parents weren't cruel, but they fought so often it seemed like the soundtrack of my childhood. By the time I turned 18, I knew survival meant keeping my head low and my mouth shut. I tried community college, but after 1 semester I bailed, drifting through a few dishwashing and line cook gigs before landing at a small Italian place in Glendale. Marco, the head chef, was the kind of guy who barked orders like he was conducting an orchestra of chaos. But he cared. In his kitchen, if you worked hard, if you kept up, you were family. Loud, sweaty, cursing like hell, but family all the same. I met Vanessa 3 years before, at a music festival in Pasadena. She was 20 then, skin golden from the summer, wearing a faded band tee and cut-off shorts. She wasn't the kind of girl who needed to be noticed. She already carried this quiet electricity. When she looked at you, it was like she knew the punchline to a joke you didn't even realize had been told. We ended up outside on the curb that first night, the music still thumping from inside, both of us laughing about how we couldn't stand the headliner. That's when I felt it, the world shrinking down to just her and me. Fast forward a year and a half, and we were sharing a small, tired 1-bedroom in a stucco 4-plex that had more cracks than charm. I'd scraped my Corolla twice trying to park in the absurdly narrow driveway. The place had character, I guess. Mr. Hernandez upstairs watered his plants at midnight, like clockwork, and Ruth, a chain-smoking woman in her 60s, blasted 80s ballads while puffing menthols in the driveway every morning. It wasn't much, but it was ours. By spring of 2018, Vanessa was 5 months pregnant. I'll never forget the day she told me. We were in the kitchen. She slid the test across the counter like it was some kind of prize ticket, her hands trembling. I hugged her, kissed the top of her head, and told her we'd be okay. I believed it. At least then I did. That summer burned. Asphalt shimmered like liquid at noon, and even after the sun dropped, the heat clung to your skin like a second shirt. We had 1 small AC unit in the living room, and it never reached the bedroom. So Vanessa slept on the couch most nights, her swollen feet propped up on pillows, fanning herself with an old People magazine. She craved frozen grapes and neon-colored ice pops. I'd stumble home from long shifts reeking of garlic and fryer oil, and she'd grin, roll her eyes at the stains on my apron, and ask about my night. Those moments felt solid, grounding, like we were building something real, which is what made what followed almost impossible to believe. The first crack came in early July. It was a slow Tuesday night at the restaurant, and Marco cut me loose early. When I walked into the apartment, the air was heavy and still. The blinds were pulled, no TV, no music, just silence. Vanessa's phone buzzed on the counter. I wouldn't normally look. We trusted each other. But the screen lit up as I passed. I can't stop thinking about last night. No name, just a number. My stomach dropped cold. I picked it up without thinking, but the message preview disappeared into the lock screen. I just stood there staring at the dark glass, trying to reason it away. Maybe it was a friend joking. Maybe it was her cousin. She was pregnant. There was no way. But those words, last night, they didn't feel innocent. I didn't sleep at all that night. By mid-August, everything felt off. Vanessa was visiting her cousin in Echo Park more often. Grocery runs stretched into 3-hour trips. She'd come home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. I tried to swallow it down, telling myself she was restless, anxious from the pregnancy. But in my gut, I knew the truth was something else. I kept telling myself people get strange when they're scared about the future. Maybe that explained the late nights, the odd errands, the distance in her eyes. But the truth was uglier. I was scared too. Not of losing her, but of realizing I already had. It was a Wednesday, thick with heat even after dark. My shirt clung damp to my back by the time I clocked out around 11:30. All I wanted was a cold shower and the hum of our AC unit, weak as it was. I was halfway down Foothill Boulevard when my phone buzzed. Tony. Dude, you left your keys on the prep counter. Shit, I muttered, spinning the car around. By the time I grabbed them, the construction zone ahead made me take the long way home. That detour, 5 extra minutes, changed everything. I was rolling past a dim bus stop outside an old laundromat when I saw her. Vanessa. Only, not Vanessa as I knew her. No maternity dress. Instead, a short skirt and a low-cut top I'd never seen. She was on the bench, and standing in front of her was a tall man in a Dodgers cap. His hands rested casually on her knees as he leaned close. And she was smiling. Not a forced, polite smile. Not nervous. But that slow, familiar smile. The one I hadn't seen in months. The one that used to be mine. My stomach hollowed. I slowed without meaning to. The man's head turned, and when his eyes flicked toward me, panic spiked in my chest. I hit the gas, flying down the block until their faces vanished behind me. My knuckles ached against the wheel. The phone buzzed. Vanessa. Hey babe, just getting groceries. Be home soon. Love you. I stared at it at the red light, pulse thudding. I should have gone home. I should have locked the door, told her not to come back. Instead, I found myself circling back, like a moth to a flame that was already burning me alive. I parked behind a shuttered bakery, tucked in the shadows of its delivery bay. From there, I could see the bus stop. Empty. My breath caught, until I noticed movement in the alley between the laundromat and an abandoned pawn shop. Vanessa. I killed the headlights, sitting in the dark. The only light in the alley came from a flickering bulb above the laundromat's back door. She stood against the wall, arms folded. The man in the Dodgers cap faced her. They weren't touching, not then, just talking. But it wasn't casual. It was the way she leaned in, the softness in her voice carrying just far enough for me to catch the tone, not the words. This wasn't new. It had history. After a moment, he pulled something from his pocket. Small, folded. Money, maybe. Or not. He slipped it into her hand. She tucked it into her purse like it was routine. Then she glanced toward the street. My chest seized. I thought she'd seen me, but nothing. She just murmured something I couldn't catch, laughed quiet and easy, then drifted past him toward the main road. He stayed in the alley lighting a cigarette, smoke curling lazily like he had nowhere else to be. I didn't follow her. I couldn't. Instead, I started the car and drove block after block until the streets blurred. Finally, I pulled into the empty lot of a closed tire shop. I sat there gripping the wheel, whispering excuses in my head. Maybe a cousin, maybe a friend, maybe nothing. But deep down, I already knew. When I walked into our apartment an hour later, she was on the couch in her usual cotton dress, barefoot, a grocery bag sitting on the counter. She smiled, like nothing in the world was wrong, and asked about my shift. Fine, I muttered, and headed straight for the bedroom. We never spoke about that night. She gave birth in December. I stayed through the baby's first year, telling myself the kid needed both of us. But every time I looked at her, I saw that alley, the flickering light, the shape of her leaning in, that smile meant for someone else. And once you've seen something like that, you can't ever unsee it. I woke up that morning with a strange heaviness in my chest. It wasn't just the 34 weeks of pregnancy pressing down on me, though that was weight enough. This was something quieter, harder to pin down, like that uneasy stillness before a thunderstorm, when the air feels too thick and the sky hasn't yet turned. My name is Ilela Nina Carver, and in late October of 2005 I was living in the small town of Ashford, North Carolina, a place where nothing louder than the freight train passing twice a week ever disturbed the night. The father of my baby, Marcus Hall, had been my high school sweetheart. We weren't married yet, but we'd been saving for a small spring ceremony. For now, we made do in a cramped apartment above the laundromat on Main Street. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV, and the air always smelled faintly of fried chicken from the diner below. I had just started the evening shift at Harper's Grocery, a family-run store my mom used to shop at when she was my age. Janice Harper, my boss, wasn't like other managers I'd known. When I told her I was pregnant, she didn't cut my hours or treat me like I was fragile. Instead, she offered to shift me to lighter duties, and on Saturdays she'd even bring me homemade lunches wrapped in foil. Halloween night was supposed to be easy. Just a few last-minute shoppers grabbing candy or wine before the trick-or-treaters came knocking. That's what I told myself anyway. By 8:45 p.m., the store had gone so still I could hear the refrigerators humming in the dairy aisle. It was just me, Janice in her office, and Dylan Knox, a sarcastic but good-natured college kid who stocked shelves part-time. I leaned against the register, stretching my aching back when Dylan wandered over, holding up a bag of fun-sized chocolates. "You think it's too late to hand these out if I start now?" he asked, smirking. I gave him a look. "You're 22, Dylan. I think you missed your trick-or-treat window." "Yeah, but imagine it. Grown man in a hoodie, knocking on doors. People would lose it." I rolled my eyes. That's not creepy at all. We were still laughing when the automatic doors slid open. 4 men walked in. At first, I didn't think much of it. They wore dollar store Halloween masks, the cheap plastic kind with eye holes too wide. Then I saw the guns. One of them, tall with broad shoulders under a black hoodie, raised his weapon toward us. "Down, on the floor, now." His voice wasn't movie dramatic. It was flat, dead serious. My body reacted before my brain did. I dropped awkwardly, my belly making the movement clumsy, my palms pressed to the cold tile. Dylan froze, then dropped beside me. 2 of the men strode toward us while another slipped down the aisle toward Janice's office. The 4th planted himself near the entrance, watching. "You!" the tall one barked, pointing straight at me. "Get up. Open the drawer." My knees buckled, but I forced myself up. My hands were slick with sweat as I reached for the register key. It slipped, clattering on the counter. "Pick it up," he snapped, stepping closer. I bent forward, wincing at the pull across my stomach, and retrieved it. My fingers shook so hard I struggled to fit it into the lock. The register at Harper's was old, temperamental. Sometimes you had to jiggle it. "It's not working," I stammered, my voice cracking. "You've got 3 seconds, he said coldly. His eyes flicked to my belly. "Or you and that baby." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Everything tunneled. The aisles, the buzzing lights, Dylan's pale face, all of it blurred until only the key, the drawer, and the life inside me remained. I twisted hard, and with a stubborn click, the register popped open. Money. Now, I scooped out the bills, mostly 5s and 10s, and shoved them into the black duffel bag he held open. Then he moved Dylan to the next register, forcing him to do the same. From the back, I heard Janice's voice tremble as she opened the safe. 4 minutes. That's all it took. They backed toward the door, weapons raised. "Don't move for 5 minutes," the tall one ordered. "Don't even breathe loud." Then they vanished into the dark parking lot. The second they were gone, my legs gave out. I sank to the floor, one hand covering my stomach. The baby kicked. Just a flutter, but enough to make my eyes sting with relief. "Elena, you okay?" Dylan's voice shook. I think so," I whispered, though my heart was slamming in my chest. Janice came out of her office pale as chalk, her hands trembling as she dialed 911. Her voice was low but steady. 4 armed suspects, masks, took cash from the registers in the safe. No one hurt. Harper's Grocery, Main Street. Still, I saw her fingers digging into the counter, white-knuckled. Dylan crouched beside me, staring at the glass doors like he half expected the men to storm back in. I stayed kneeling, one palm pressed to my belly, the other braced against the tile. The baby was still moving, uneven, faint, but alive. And for that, I held on. I kept replaying the tall man's words in my head. You and that baby. It wasn't just a robbery anymore, it was personal. The police showed up in what they said was 5 minutes, though it felt more like 20. 2 officers entered first, weapons drawn, sweeping the aisles before motioning the others inside. Janice immediately launched into an explanation, her voice shaky but focused, while another officer, a man in his late 40s with tired, bloodshot eyes, crouched in front of me. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" "No. I don't think so, just shaken." "You're pregnant?" I nodded. "Any pain? Any bleeding?" "No. Just scared." "All right. We'll still have EMS take a look, just to be safe." I didn't argue. When the paramedics arrived, one of them clipped a cuff to my arm, checked my vitals, and then pressed the cold disc of a Doppler monitor to my belly. I stared at her face, desperate for any hint of what she was hearing. When she finally smiled at the faint, rapid thump of the baby's heartbeat, the knot in my chest loosened just enough for me to breathe. But even then, I couldn't shake the memory of that man's eyes. How flat they were when he looked at me, like I was just an obstacle, not a person. The rest of the night blurred into a haze of interviews, forms, and the constant crackle of police radios. They pulled the security footage, though Janice warned them it was grainy and badly angled. One officer muttered to another. They knew exactly where to go. Registers safe, in and out. "Inside job?" the younger one asked. "Could be, or they've done this before." By the time I stumbled home, it was past midnight. Marcus was pacing the living room, his phone clutched tight in his hand. "Elena, God, are you okay? I've been calling for an hour." "I'm fine," I said, though my voice cracked. "The store got robbed." "What?" He crossed the room in 2 steps and wrapped me in his arms. "Are you hurt?" "They had guns, Marcus. One of them—" My throat closed. He pulled back just enough to look at me. "He what?" He threatened the baby." Marcus's jaw tightened, and he held me even closer. He didn't let go for the rest of the night. I tried to sleep, but every sound outside made my muscles seize. When a car backfired down the street, I sat bolt upright, heart hammering. By morning, the news had already reached the local station. The story was short. Armed robbery at Harper's Grocery, suspects still at large. Seeing it scroll across the TV screen made it feel less like a nightmare and more like something I'd never outrun. At 10 a.m., Janice called. "You don't need to come in for a few days," she said. "Take some time. I'm giving Dylan time off too." "Thanks, Janice. I don't think I could go back right now." The first couple of days passed quietly. Marcus insisted on driving me everywhere, even to the OB appointment I'd booked weeks before. Dr. Lang reassured me that stress alone wouldn't harm the baby, so long as I watched for bleeding or cramping. But on the 3rd night, something changed. It was just past 11. Marcus had gone to bed early, and I was on the couch sipping chamomile tea trying to calm my nerves. The street below was empty, except for a single parked sedan I didn't recognize. At first, I thought nothing of it. Cars lined Main Street all the time. But when I glanced again, the sedan was still there and someone was sitting in the driver's seat. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I switched off the lamp and crept closer to the window, careful not to make noise. The figure wasn't on their phone, wasn't moving at all, just staring at our building. My pulse thundered in my ears. I stepped back, torn between waking Marcus and calling the police. When I looked again, 30 seconds later, the car was gone. The next morning, I told Marcus. He frowned. Maybe it was just someone waiting on a friend. Maybe, I said softly. But I didn't believe it. That night I dreamed of the tall man. In the dream he stood in the baby's unfinished nursery, holding the black duffel bag, staring at me in silence. I woke drenched in sweat, my heart rattling against my ribs. Over the next week, the unease only grew. I swore I heard footsteps trailing me on the way to the post office, though every time I turned around the street was empty. Once I spotted a shadow moving across the laundromat lot after dark, gone before I could look twice. Marcus thought I was just jumpy. Dr. Lang said hypervigilance was normal after trauma. But on the 12th night I woke to a sound I couldn't explain. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from our window. We lived on the second floor. I froze, every muscle locking in place. Marcus stirred beside me. "What's that?" he mumbled. Before I could answer, the tapping stopped. We got up, checked the window. Nothing. No branches, no birds. No reason for the sound. Marcus shrugged it off, but I lay awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling. 2 days later, it escalated. Marcus was working late at the auto shop, and I was alone in the apartment when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks on the front door. I hesitated. We weren't expecting anyone. Slowly, I pressed my eye to the peephole. No one. The hallway was empty. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just my imagination, and it wasn't over. I never really thought about danger before I got pregnant. Not in the bone-deep way that makes you double-check the backseat of your car or scan a parking lot twice before you step out. Back then, danger was something that happened to other people on the news, not something that lived in the back of my mind. Before the baby, I was careless in ways I didn't even notice. Grocery runs at midnight, late coffee dates with friends, even walking alone when the city was asleep just to clear my head. None of it ever seemed risky. That changed in the winter of 2019. I was 27 then, 7 months along, carrying a belly that made even rolling over in bed feel like an Olympic event. My husband Daniel and I had been married 3 years. We lived in Brighton, Massachusetts, a suburb technically, though the city was only a half-hour away if traffic was light. Our street was quiet, rows of modest houses, yards with leaf piles in the fall, the kind of place where you might wave to your neighbor while taking out the trash but never really know their last name. The pregnancy had been planned, but planning didn't make it feel any less unreal. I still remember staring at that tiny plus sign on the stick. My laugh had been nervous, shaky, while Daniel just cried. He grabbed me and said, "We're really doing this." Like he had to hear himself say it to believe it. My mind spun with questions. What if I'm not ready? What if I screw this up? What if something goes wrong? Over the months, those spirals softened into a kind of routine. Doctor appointments that felt both comforting and terrifying. Maternity clothes I wasn't sure I recognized myself in, and cravings that hit with the force of an obsession. I worked part-time at a small law firm downtown, but by December I was mostly home. My doctor said avoiding stress was best, and honestly, the thought of squeezing onto the commuter rail with this belly made me shudder. Daniel and I did most of our shopping at Hanson's Market, just a few blocks away. It wasn't a big place, not a chain, just a family-run store where the cashiers remembered your name and knew exactly which brand of cheddar Daniel swore by. The parking lot curled around the side of the building, half lit by tall lampposts and the warm yellow spill from the front windows. It was a Thursday night in late December. The day had been unremarkable. Emails in the morning, laundry in the afternoon, while a true crime podcast droned on about some unsolved disappearance. By evening, Daniel texted that he'd be stuck in a meeting until after 9. Normally that wouldn't bother me, but all day I'd been consumed by one thought: strawberries. Pregnancy cravings aren't wants. They're orders from some part of your brain you didn't know existed. If I didn't get strawberries that night, I knew I'd lie awake gnawing on the idea of them. When I mentioned it on the phone, Daniel groaned. It's dark out. Just wait until tomorrow, please." I laughed. "It's Hanson's. 2 blocks. I'll be back in 20 minutes. You're 7 months pregnant, babe. What if the sidewalks are icy? Let me drive you when I get home." "Seriously, I'll be fine. Don't worry." He sighed. "Fine. Just text me when you're back, okay?" When I pulled into Hanson's, only a few cars dotted the lot. Inside, the store was hushed, almost cozy, soft holiday music trickling through the speakers. The air smelled faintly of citrus, the floor shining with the residue of a fresh mop. I moved quickly. Strawberries, a loaf of bread, milk, a couple of yogurts. Jack, the night clerk, a tall kid with a messy bun who always looked half asleep, rang me up and grinned. "Good night, Mrs. H," he said like he always did. The cold slapped me the moment the sliding doors opened. My breath billowed out in white bursts as I pushed the cart toward my car, parked beneath a lamp that buzzed and flickered every few seconds. That's when I noticed him. A man leaned against a silver sedan 3 spaces over, hands buried in his jacket pockets. A baseball cap pulled low, shadowing his face. He didn't move, didn't look up. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was waiting for someone inside. People did that all the time, but I felt it. The prickle at the back of my neck, the subtle tightening in my chest. That instinct you don't want to admit is there. As I slid the last bag into the trunk, I felt it. That heavy, crawling sensation of being watched. Not the harmless glance of a stranger, but a steady weight pressing between my shoulder blades. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just jittery from hormones and the cold. But when I closed the trunk and turned toward my driver's side door, he moved. The man pushed off the silver sedan and walked toward me, slow, deliberate. "Hey," he called out. I froze. My polite smile felt plastered on my face. "Hi. Need a hand with those bags?" His voice was casual, too casual. "No, I'm all set, thanks." He stopped a few feet away, studying me in a way that made my skin tighten. His eyes flicked downward. "How far along are you?" Something in my chest clenched. "Sorry? Your baby," he clarified, nodding at my stomach. "How far along?" 7 months, I said before I could stop myself. The words slipped out like a reflex. He smiled faintly, but it never touched his eyes. "That's good. That's real good." A chill slid down my spine. I shifted toward my door, desperate to end the conversation. "Have a good night." But before I could take another step, he moved into my path. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. "You need to come with me. Don't make a scene." My mouth opened to protest, but then his hand slid into his jacket and came back out holding a gun. Compact. Black. The sight of it made my knees weaken. "If you scream," he said softly, "it's over. You understand?" My heart pounded so hard it hurt. "Please. I'm pregnant." "I know," he replied, smiling wider this time. "That's why I'm here." The words didn't make sense at first, not until they sank like stones into my stomach. "That's why I'm here." He tilted his head toward the silver sedan. "Trunk, now." I glanced toward the store, about 50 feet away. Jack was probably still at the register, scrolling his phone. Too far, too distracted. The man stepped closer. "Move." I took a trembling step toward the sedan. My keys rattled violently in my hand. His footsteps crunched behind me only a foot away. Then, like a miracle, the sliding doors hissed open. "Emily, you forgot your receipt." It was Jack. He was walking out, holding a slip of paper, his messy bun catching the lamplight. The man stiffened. He glanced over his shoulder. I didn't think. I just bolted. "Call 911, I screamed. Jack's eyes went wide. "What's—" "He has a gun!" The man cursed, spun and sprinted for his sedan. Tires shrieked a second later, rubber burning against asphalt. Inside, my legs gave out. Jack caught me under the arms and half carried me to a chair in the back office, his hands shaking as he dialed 911. I clutched my belly, desperate to shield the baby from what had almost happened, my breath ragged and shallow. The police arrived within minutes. I described him as best I could. Mid-20s, maybe 6 feet tall, lean build, dark jacket, baseball cap pulled low. I told them about the gun, about what he'd said. One officer asked gently, "Did he make any specific threats toward the baby?" I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat. He said that's why he was here. I don't know what that means. Daniel burst into the office before I could continue. His face was pale, jaw tight, his tie half loosened like he'd run from the car. He dropped to his knees beside me, pulling me into his arms as if he needed proof I was still alive. The police took my statement, reviewed the security footage, but the lot's lighting was terrible. The only clear image showed me loading my groceries, then sprinting toward Jack. The next morning they called. They'd found an abandoned silver sedan 2 towns over. Inside, rope, duct tape, a hunting knife, no fingerprints, no ID, and no man. He was gone. For the rest of my pregnancy, I never went anywhere alone after dark. Daniel insisted on driving me everywhere, appointments, errands, even the 5-minute trip for milk. Every parking lot felt like a trap. Every unexpected noise made me flinch. I locked our doors obsessively, sometimes even in the middle of the afternoon with the sun blazing outside. At night, I'd lie awake, replaying that moment over and over. That's why I'm here. What did he mean? Had he followed me before? Did he know where we lived? Was he waiting for another woman, another swollen belly? Even after Lily was born, the fear clung to me. At the grocery store, I found myself scanning every aisle, watching every parked car. The idea that someone could look at a pregnant woman and see not a person, but an opportunity, made my skin crawl. It's been years now. Lily's in kindergarten. I've learned to laugh again, to go out at night sometimes. But I still park under the brightest light I can find. I still thread my keys between my fingers when I walk to my car, because now I know evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just a man in a parking lot, smiling at you like you already belong to him. I woke up that morning with a strange heaviness pressing against my chest. It wasn't the sluggish weight of exhaustion, and it wasn't the jittery aftermath of the cheap coffee I'd been leaning on to get through the days. This felt different, quieter, heavier, almost like a warning sitting beneath my ribs, as if my body knew something about the day ahead that my mind wasn't ready to catch up to. My name is Isabel Hartman. I was 32 at the time, living in a small rental house on the northern edge of a Pennsylvania town. Most people only pass through on their way to somewhere else. At that point in my life, I was 7 months pregnant with my first child. The pregnancy hadn't been planned, not in the way people dream of it anyway. But Daniel, my partner, and I were determined to make it work. We had moved out here from the city just a few months earlier. He had landed steady work with a construction company, and I was pulling in enough from medical transcription jobs at home to cover what his paychecks couldn't. Life was slow, quiet, stripped down, or at least, that's how it looked from the outside. The hardest thing for me wasn't the nausea or the back pain, though both had been relentless. It was the insomnia. I could be bone tired, my body begging for sleep. But the moment I lay down, my mind lit up. I'd lie awake until 3 in the morning, thoughts spiraling. Baby names, delivery plans, what our bank account would look like by spring, or the darker, irrational thoughts that came creeping in when Daniel worked his overnight shifts. What if someone broke in? What if I couldn't protect myself, let alone the baby? Most nights I'd give up on sleep and make myself a cup of tea. I had this ritual of sitting by the living room window, hands wrapped around the mug, staring out at the empty road. The stillness of it used to calm me. Used to. It was early November, one of those nights where frost clung to the mailbox outside like a thin layer of glass. The clock on the stove had just turned 2:40 a.m. Daniel was at work. I'd gotten up because the baby wouldn't stop kicking, and the dull ache in my lower back made lying down unbearable. I shuffled into the kitchen, wincing at every sharp jab from inside me, made a cup of chamomile tea, then wandered to the front window. The street was silent, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. Now and then a weak gust of wind shook loose the last shriveled leaves clinging to the maples. I took a sip of tea, breathing in the steam, and that's when I noticed it. Something rolling out into the middle of the road. A red rubber ball. It bounced once, slow and deliberate, then wobbled into stillness. At first I thought I was overtired, seeing things. But no, the ball was real, sitting there under the streetlight's pale glow. I frowned, pressing closer to the glass. My neighborhood wasn't exactly crawling with kids. Mostly older couples, retirees, a few families here and there, but none with children young enough to be out at nearly 3 in the morning. The ball had come from the woods across the street. I could see the path it must have taken, rolling from between the trees. It sat there motionless for a few seconds, then gave one last bounce on its own before settling again. The sound slipped out of me before I could stop it. What the hell? My first instinct was that there had to be a child out there, which didn't make sense at all. It was below freezing, and the nearest house with kids was a good 10-minute drive away. Still, I felt the automatic urge to reach for my phone. My hand hovered over it, but I didn't call anyone. Instead, I just stood there, tea warming my palms, breath fogging faintly against the cold glass, watching that ball. And then, movement. From the tree line, something shifted. A figure stepped out. Tall. Too tall. My heart gave one hard, painful thump. I couldn't make out details, no face, no clothing, just a solid black silhouette against the pale wash of moonlight. The kind of darkness that looked wrong, as if it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. The figure didn't move toward the ball, didn't even bend down. It just stood there, unnervingly still, its head tilted slightly upward, angled in a way that made my stomach knot, because it looked like it was staring straight at my window. I froze, the tea trembling faintly in my hand. The first thing my mind screamed was, "Don't move, don't let them know you see them." My muscles locked up, every instinct telling me to shrink into the shadows. I eased myself back from the window, slow and careful, my heart pounding so violently I could hear it in my ears, like a drum inside my skull. My hands were trembling when I fumbled for my phone, swiping it open with clumsy fingers. I started to call Daniel, but then I froze. What was I going to say? That someone was standing in the yard staring at me? That a ball had rolled out of the woods? I pictured him at work, exhausted, covered in sawdust and sweat, listening to me unravel over the phone. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm losing it? I risked one more glance, pulling the curtain back just a fraction. My stomach dropped. The figure was gone. The ball was gone too. The next morning I tried to convince myself it had been nothing. Maybe I was overtired, my mind conjuring phantoms out of shadows and frost. Maybe an animal had nudged a toy from somewhere. That explanation should have comforted me. But deep down, beneath every rational excuse, I knew it wasn't that. Over the next week, little things kept happening. I'd find the mailbox door hanging open in the morning, though I swore I'd shut it. Once I heard 3 slow taps on the living room window. Pause, then 2 more. A rhythm. I forced myself to look, bracing for someone's face pressed against the glass. But there was nothing. When I told Daniel, he tried to soothe me. "Babe, it's probably just some neighborhood kid messing around. Or raccoons, you know how they are." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted that more than anything. But my gut wouldn't let me. And then, one night it got worse. I woke at 3:15 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in our yard. Not hurried, not hesitant, just steady, deliberate crunches against the frost-coated grass. I froze in bed, my entire body prickling, straining to listen. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and texted Daniel. Me. Someone's outside. Daniel. Call the cops, I'm 40 minutes away. By the time I dialed 911, my fingers were trembling so hard I could barely hit the numbers. As I waited for the dispatcher, I heard it, something brushing along the side of the house, like fingertips dragging slowly across the siding. By the time the police arrived, there was nothing. No intruder, no footprints in the frost, no sign of forced entry. Just me, trembling on the couch, clutching my belly, while they gave me the tired speech. Call us if you see anything else. 2 nights later, it escalated. It was 2:50 a.m. The house was silent except for the hum of the fridge. I lay in bed, scrolling on my phone, trying to fight off the usual insomnia when I heard it, the bounce of a ball. Thump, thump, thump. Slow, deliberate, right outside my bedroom window. My breath caught in my throat. I sat there frozen, my skin prickling with cold sweat. The ball bounced again, and then it stopped. A voice followed, soft, low, almost sing-song. Can I come in? I clamped both hands over my mouth, choking back a cry. My heart hammered so violently I thought I might pass out. I didn't move, didn't answer. I barely let myself breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the sound faded. No footsteps, no ball. Nothing but the dead quiet of the house. When morning came, I forced myself to check the window. My stomach twisted at what I found. Wet handprints smeared across the glass. Small. Too small to belong to an adult. But the fingers were wrong. They were too long, stretched unnaturally, like something trying to imitate a child's hands but not getting it quite right. That was the day I packed a bag. I went to stay with my sister until Daniel could take time off. We sold that house not long after our daughter was born. It's been 5 years now. I haven't seen the red ball again. Haven't heard that voice again. But sometimes late at night when the house is still and I pass by my daughter's room, I'll catch it. A faint, slow thump, thump from somewhere outside. When I look, the ball isn't there. But the feeling is. The same cold certainty. Someone is watching. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who kept secrets from my wife. Not the harmless little lies you tell to spare someone's feelings, but the kind of truth that sits inside you like a lump of iron, heavy and immovable, changing the way you look at yourself in the mirror. But that's exactly where I found myself in the winter of 1987, when life was supposed to be coming together but instead felt like it was unraveling thread by thread. I was 27 then, working as a delivery driver for a small appliance shop in Sutton, South London. My wife Claire was 4 months pregnant with our first child. We'd been married just over a year, still settling into the modest terrace house her parents had scraped together a deposit for. I was supposed to be the steady one, the man with a plan, the provider. That illusion shattered one cold Thursday afternoon. I'd just returned from a delivery run when Pete, the manager, asked me to step upstairs for a quick word. The moment I saw his eyes avoiding mine, I knew. "We're shutting the store in 2 weeks," he muttered, shuffling a pile of papers as though they might hide his guilt. "Head office says sales are down. Nothing we can do." It felt like my stomach had dropped into my boots. It wasn't just losing the job. It was the timing. Claire's maternity leave was about to start. The cot for the baby still sat unopened in its flat-pack box in the spare room, and the gas bill had landed on the mat that very morning. The wages I'd been counting on to keep the roof over us were gone, just like that. The month after the closure was pure hell. Every week I dragged myself to the job center, applying for anything. Warehouse porter, night security, laborer. But it was the Thatcher years. Jobs were scarce, especially for a man like me with no trade or degree. Claire tried to be brave. "We'll manage, love. We always do," she said, cupping my cheek with that little smile. But I saw the fear hiding behind her eyes. I saw it in the way she split one tea bag between 2 mugs, or watered down the stew so it could stretch another night. One Tuesday, about 6 weeks after I lost the job, I bumped into an old mate on the high street, outside a betting shop. Keith. We'd gone to school together, drifted apart in our 20s, but he'd always been one of those blokes who somehow landed on his feet no matter the circumstance. "You look like death warmed up," he said, flicking his lighter and squinting through the cigarette smoke. "Cheers," I muttered, stuffing my hands in my pockets. "Things aren't great at home." He tilted his head, the way someone does when they already know more than you've said. "Come on, let me buy you a pint. You can tell me all about it." I tried to wave him off. I didn't even have the cash to buy a round. "My treat," he insisted. "You look like you need it." So we ended up in the White Hart, a dingy little pub where the carpets were sticky and the air smelled of stale ale and smoke that had seeped into the walls over decades. Over 2 pints I laid it all out. The redundancy, the baby on the way, the bills piling up. Keith didn't interrupt much, just nodded, muttered, "That's rough, mate," and let me pour it out. When I finally trailed off, he leaned back, took a long drag on his cigarette, and gave me a look. "You want to make some proper money?" I barked a laugh. "Don't we all?" "No, I'm serious. Nothing complicated. Bit of driving. You've always been decent behind the wheel, yeah?" "Depends what I'm driving," I said, trying to joke, though something in me tightened. Keith grinned, like he'd been waiting for that. "Cars. Just picking one up, dropping it off somewhere. Couple hours work. 300 quid. 300 pounds. At that time, it might as well have been 3,000. My gut twisted. Too good to be true. "What's the catch?" I asked. He shrugged, casual, smoke curling from his lips. "Car might have, let's just say something of value in it. You don't need to know the details. Safer if you don't." That should have been the moment I walked away. But I didn't. I thought of Claire at home, rubbing her lower back because the baby was sitting heavy, and the gas meter swallowing pound coins faster than we could feed it. And instead of walking, I nodded. "All right," I said quietly. The first job was easy. Train down to Brighton. The first job had been simple. Pick up a dull gray Ford Sierra from a bloke named Reza, drive it to an industrial estate in Croydon, hand over the keys and walk away with an envelope stuffed with 20s. The second run was just as uneventful. The third too. I kept my head down, didn't ask questions, and tried not to think about what I might be moving. I told Claire I was helping a mate shift secondhand motors for cash in hand. She was so relieved to see money coming in again that she didn't press me for details. Maybe she didn't want to know. A few weeks later, Keith grinned at me across a table in the White Hart and said, "Got something closer to home. Pays double." And so the runs became more frequent, the envelopes fatter, and with each easy job I started to breathe easier. Too easy. I relaxed, stupidly, dangerously relaxed. Then came the night it all went to hell. It was a Friday in late March, sharp cold in the air, the kind that made your breath look like smoke. The job was to pick up a Vauxhall Carlton from a small Turkish cafe on the edge of Mitcham. I'd been there before. The owners were decent, always offering me sticky baklava pastries and thick bitter coffee. But when I arrived that night, the place was shuttered, dark, too quiet. I knocked on the side door. "It's Dan," I called out, using the name Keith had told me to use. A voice from inside replied, "Come in." The shutter rattled up just high enough for me to duck under. The second my foot crossed the threshold, something slammed into my face. White-hot pain burst behind my eyes. I crumpled to my knees, gasping as rough hands twisted my arms behind my back. Tape bit into my wrists, then my ankles. My head cleared just enough for me to realize I wasn't the only one. 4 of the Turkish lads I knew were already on the floor, bound and gagged, their faces streaked with blood. And towering over them was a man I'd never seen before. Tall, broad shoulders, a ski mask pulled tight over his face. In one hand, he held a long kitchen knife that gleamed in the dim light. "You sell poison," he snarled, his voice raw and cracked with fury. "You kill kids for money. Tonight you get a taste of it yourselves." He slammed a cling film-wrapped package onto the table and tore it open. Heroin. More than I'd ever seen in one place. He yanked one of the men upright, pried his mouth open and shoved the powder toward him. The man gagged and thrashed, muffled cries filling the room. The masked man laughed, a hard, joyless sound that made my skin crawl. Then his gaze snapped to me. "And you," he spat, stepping closer. "The courier boy. Too stupid to know or too greedy to care." I shook my head desperately. I'm not." The knife kissed my cheek, just enough to draw a thin line of blood. "You carry death, mate. Same as them." I was trembling so violently my teeth clattered. My mind leapt to Claire, to the baby she carried, to the possibility that I might never see either of them again. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed one of the bound men working furiously at his restraints, his wrists slick with sweat. And then, somehow, he slipped one hand free. It happened in a blur. He lunged, slamming into the masked man with a guttural roar. They crashed into the table, sending the heroin spilling across the floor. The knife skittered away. Shouts erupted, Turkish and English tangled together in a storm of rage and panic. A dull, wet crack echoed through the room. I never saw what struck the final blow. Maybe the edge of the table, maybe a chair. But then the masked man went still. Silence. My own ragged breathing roared in my ears. Within half an hour, more men had arrived. No one spoke to me. They cut the tape from my wrists and ankles, stripped me of my jacket, probably to burn, and shoved a glass of throat-burning raka into my hand. I sat there in borrowed clothes, chain-smoking, trying to get my hands to stop shaking. Finally, someone slid a set of car keys across the table. "Go." That was all they said. I never took another job from Keith. When he pressed me, I told him everything. He listened quietly, then muttered, "Bloody hell." He tried to tempt me back with more money, but I shook my head. No amount was worth Claire becoming a widow before our child was even born. 2 months later, I was stacking paper in a print shop part-time, studying IT in the evenings. By the time my daughter Sophie turned 4, I had my first proper job in the field. I'm 65 now, retired. Claire and I divorced years ago, but we're on good terms. Sophie still knows nothing about what I did in those months, and I pray she never does. Sometimes, though, I think back to that night in the cafe, how one man's rage, one twist of chance, could have ended me. And in the quiet hours, when the house is still, I can still hear his voice in my head, too stupid to know or too greedy to care. And even now, I don't know which it was. I never thought the last month of pregnancy would feel like a trial of endurance, like every single day was testing whether I could hold myself together. For most of my life, I'd been a city person, used to the endless hum of buses grinding down cracked streets, the thud of footsteps above me in some cramped apartment, the glow of neon leaking in through thin curtains. Noise was constant, almost comforting. But when I married Daniel 2 years ago, we both agreed that wasn't the life we wanted for a family. The chaos, the fumes, the sirens at 3 in the morning. We wanted quiet, space, a home where our kids could grow up hearing birds instead of traffic. So, last winter, we bought a cedar-sided house tucked deep into the Adirondack foothills, outside a town so small it barely existed on a map, Briar's Hollow. Our place wasn't just off the beaten path, it felt miles from civilization itself. And now, with less than 2 weeks until my due date, every movement had become a chore. My back throbbed in places I didn't even know had muscles. My fingers had puffed up so badly I couldn't even hold a pen without pain. Most days, I barely left the sagging old couch in the living room, staring out at a skeleton forest of bare trees and trying not to obsess over how far away the nearest hospital really was. Daniel worked as a ranger at the state park. Winter meant long hours, sometimes overnight shifts, when lost hunters or stranded hikers needed help. He hated leaving me alone, but I always told him I'd be fine. We had sturdy locks, a heavy flashlight sitting by the front door, and Toby, our German shepherd, who never failed to sound the alarm at the slightest movement. That night in early February, the snow had hardened into a glittering crust under a sharp moon. Daniel's co-worker's truck had broken down, so he'd been called in last minute. "I'll be back by sunrise," he promised, tugging on his thick green parka, his face shadowed with worry. "Phone's fully charged?" he asked. "Right here," I said, holding it up. "And I'll call if anything happens, I promise, go." He leaned in, kissed me, scratched Toby behind the ears. The door closed behind him with that hollow, echoing thud I always hated. The sound of emptiness rushing in. I microwaved a bowl of leftover soup, changed into my softest flannel pajamas and stretched out on the couch. My eyelids were just starting to sink shut when Toby let out a low, guttural growl that snapped me back awake. I glanced at the clock, 11:42 p.m. The weight of my belly made sitting up slow, awkward. I turned toward the front window. Through the lace curtain, I caught two faint beams cutting between the trees. Headlights, moving closer. My first thought was Daniel. Maybe something changed. Maybe he'd been sent home early. But then the light stopped. The engine idled low, then cut out. Toby's growl deepened. Then came the crunch of boots on snow. Not one set. Several. I shuffled toward the window, heart hammering, and pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek through. Down the narrow driveway, little more than a carved path through snowdrifts, sat an old tan van. No plates. Rust creeping up its sides, the back doors dented in like they'd been kicked. 4 men trudged toward the house. Not hunters, not locals, all dressed in dark coats, boots heavy in the snow. One carried something long in his hand. For a moment I thought rifle, but the glint under the moonlight looked more like a metal pipe. One of them stopped mid-stride and tilted his head toward the window. Even from a distance I could see the grin under his beard. Toby erupted in sharp, furious barks, the kind that rattled the air. But the men didn't stop, didn't even flinch. They just kept coming. Then, 3 heavy bangs shook the door, not polite knocks, demands. A voice followed, calm but edged with something darker. "Evening, ma'am. Cold out here. Mind letting us in?" My throat went dry. Against my better judgment, I called back, "My husband's not home." The words left my mouth before I could stop them, and instantly I regretted it. Another voice, higher, mocking. "We know. We watched him leave earlier. Won't be long. Just need a little warmth. Looks like you've got plenty." Toby snarled, hackles raised, teeth bared, the sound vibrating through the room. I staggered back, knees stiff, mind racing. How did they know I was alone? The first man's voice again, closer now, almost at the door. "You're expecting, ain't you? Pretty far along. Bet you're tender." My breath hitched so sharply it hurt. Every instinct in me screamed danger, but my body felt frozen, caught between fight and collapse. The banging started again, harder this time. Thump, thump, thump. The door shuddered under the weight of the blows, followed by the screech of metal against the handle. They were trying to force it. Toby lunged, his barking so frenzied and violent I thought he might tear the door down himself. My pulse stuttered, but then I heard something worse. Movement on the side of the house. The kitchen. I spun just in time to see a shadow sweep across the curtain. My phone was only a few feet away on the coffee table, but panic made my fingers useless. I reached, fumbled, and sent it skittering across the hardwood with a hollow clatter. "Toby," I hissed, pointing to the kitchen. He bolted. A second later, shattering glass. A man swore, his voice guttural and mean, as Toby lunged at the broken window, teeth snapping. I heard the scrape of boots retreating, a pained curse fading into the night. Relief sparked for half a second, before a different sound hit me like ice water. A heavy thud. From inside. The back door. The realization hollowed me out. I had left the laundry room door unlocked earlier after dragging in firewood. My chest seized. The house wasn't just under attack, they were already inside. I grabbed the flashlight from its hook, my heart hammering so violently, my vision pulsed. Each step toward the basement door felt like I was dragging chains. My back screamed with the effort, every movement a reminder of the child inside me. Somehow I twisted the knob, forced it open, and slipped inside. I eased the door shut, barely daring to breathe. The basement air was sharp with cold, the kind that turned each exhale into a faint, cloudy ghost. I shuffled halfway down the creaking steps and killed the flashlight, clutching the railing in the dark. My own breathing rasped, too loud, echoing in my head. Above me the sound of boots, heavy, deliberate. They wanted me to hear. "She's close," one voice said, low, gravelly. "You can smell it." I slapped a hand over my mouth to stop the sob clawing its way out. Then, another sound. From below. I froze, head snapping toward the dark at the bottom of the stairs. At first I thought my imagination was playing tricks, but then I saw them. Shapes. 3 of them, standing at the base of the steps, blocking the only other exit. The one in front stepped into the faint beam of moonlight leaking through a high, grimy window. His grin was stretched wide, teeth yellow and crooked. "Came in through the cellar doors," he whispered, almost playful, like it was a secret between us. "You really shouldn't leave those unlatched." My knees nearly buckled. My grip on the railing turned my knuckles bone white. They started climbing, slow and deliberate, like predators circling something wounded. "Stay back," my voice cracked, pathetic. The leader chuckled. "Or what? You'll waddle us to death?" Something inside me snapped, hot and sharp. With shaking hands, I lifted the flashlight and smashed it down on the railing. Glass shattered, plunging us into pure black. In that chaos, my hand found cold metal leaning against the wall. A crowbar, rusted, heavy. The first man lunged. I swung with everything I had. The crowbar cracked against his shoulder with a dull thud. He staggered back, swearing, but the others kept advancing. Above us, Toby's bark erupted again. Then a gunshot. The sound tore through me. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Then Daniel's voice. "Claire." Desperate, loud. "Where are you?" "In the basement," I screamed, raw, every shred of fear pouring out. The men froze, glanced at one another, and then they bolted. Shoving past the one I'd struck, they scrambled down the cellar steps, disappearing into the night. Seconds later, Daniel appeared in the doorway, chest heaving, rifle raised. He grabbed my arm, pulling me up the stairs, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. By the time we staggered into the driveway, the old van was already fishtailing down the road, tires spitting snow into the air. The sheriff came, took our statements, his voice calm but laced with doubt. Promised extra patrols, though I could tell by the flatness in his tone he didn't expect to catch them. 10 days later, I gave birth to our son Noah. 6 months have passed since then. He's healthy. Perfect. We still live in that cedar-sided house, but Daniel has reinforced every window, every door. The cellar now has 3 locks. And me? I don't look out at the trees at night anymore. Because sometimes when the wind dies low and the snow settles, I swear I hear it again, boots crunching softly in the dark. I was 6 months pregnant when I realized someone was watching me through my apartment window. I never imagined I'd start a story like this, but here I am. Back then, I was 23, young, newly married, and still getting used to the odd heaviness of pregnancy. Every time I stood up, I could feel my balance tilt, like the weight in my belly was pulling me toward the ground. My husband, Mark, and I had just moved to Brookhaven, a city that existed in that uneasy middle ground. Small enough to only have 1 hospital, yet large enough that people spoke in half-whispers about neighborhoods you shouldn't walk through after dark. We didn't have the luxury of choice. Mark's job transfer had come through suddenly, and the only place within our budget was a squat beige apartment building tucked behind a gas station. The carpets carried that stale, baked-in cigarette smell, no matter how many candles I lit. The kind of place where you could scrub until your knees gave out and still never feel like it was clean. The complex was small, 12 units facing a cracked parking lot where tenants parked crooked, as if the painted lines were only suggestions. From our kitchen window I could see the back alley, uneven pavement stretching toward a row of dumpsters, beyond them a thin barrier of ragged trees that looked dead even in summer. Our landlord, Harriet, a woman with yellowed fingers from decades of chain smoking, handed over the keys with a muttered warning. "Keep your windows locked at night. We've had incidents." She didn't say what kind. She didn't need to. Her voice dipped low, like the very walls might betray her if she spoke louder. I brushed it off. I told myself she was just the type who loved drama, but 2 weeks later, when it first happened, I thought about her words. It was early evening, that washed-out hour when the light fades and everything outside your window looks submerged, blurred, not quite real. I was in the bedroom, carefully unpacking baby clothes, folding tiny onesies into neat stacks. Mark was still at work, and the only sound in the apartment was the dull hum of traffic from the main road. Daisy, our brindle pit mix, lay sprawled across the doorway with her head on her paws, half asleep. Then her head snapped up, ears pricked, tail stiff. A second later I heard it too. A faint scraping, metal against wood. My fingers froze mid-fold, clutching a soft cotton sleeve. The noise came again, longer this time. Not random, deliberate, like someone trying to pry something open. Daisy's body tensed, a sharp bark bursting from her throat. Heart pounding, I crossed the room and tugged the blinds just enough to peek. All I could see was the far edge of the parking lot. No one there, no movement. But the sound wasn't coming from far away. It was right up against our bedroom wall. I whispered to myself, "It's someone at the dumpster. It's a car, a tool, something normal." But Daisy growled, low and steady, her gaze locked on the window as if she could see what I couldn't. I backed away, fumbling for my phone. My thumb hovered over Mark's name, but I stopped. He'd be home soon. Calling him over a noise? It felt ridiculous. And then, silence. Sharp, unnatural silence, as if the night itself was holding its breath. I stood frozen until I heard Mark's keys at the door. When I told him, his response was the kind of tired, half-patient reassurance I knew too well. "You're sure it wasn't just the wind?" he asked, dropping his bag on the couch. It was deliberate, like someone was trying to. I stopped short. I didn't want to say break in. Mark gave me a soft smile, weary but kind. "I'll check it out." He grabbed Daisy's leash, circled the building, and came back with wet hair from the drizzle outside. "Nothing out there. Screens are fine. No damage." I nodded, but the unease clung to me, sticking like smoke in my lungs. 4 nights later, it happened again. This time after dark. Mark was in the shower, steam rolling down the hallway, while I sat on the couch with my swollen ankles propped on a pillow, scrolling absently through my phone. Daisy was curled beside me, her breathing steady. Then, a sound, faint, careful, a click, click, against the glass. Every muscle in my body went taut. Daisy's eyes flew open. She didn't bark this time. She just stared toward the hall, ears rigid, her body trembling with alertness. The scraping shifted, subtle but unmistakable, the sound of a screen being nudged upward. "Mark!" My voice cracked halfway through his name. The shower shut off. A beat later, he came running into the living room, water dripping from his hair, clutching a towel around his waist. His chest was still steaming from the heat. "What is it? What's wrong?" he demanded. "It's the bedroom window," I whispered, my throat dry. "Someone's—" But before I could finish, Mark was already sprinting down the hall. From the living room I heard his voice, loud, raw, not scared but furious. "Hey, get the hell out of here!" My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself up and hurried after him. When I reached the bedroom, Mark was gripping the window frame with both hands, his chest heaving. His knuckles were white. "They cut the screen," he said, his voice low, almost vibrating with anger. "I saw them. They were right there. My stomach lurched. Who? Mark turned his head slowly, his jaw tight. I think it was my cousin. I knew instantly who he meant. Ethan, Mark's second cousin. I'd met him maybe twice at family reunions years ago. The last time he'd been 17, thin, restless, with that jittery energy of someone always scanning for trouble. His face was sharp, distinct. You couldn't mistake it once you'd seen it. You're sure? I asked, barely above a whisper. Positive, Mark said flatly. I'd know that face anywhere. I didn't know much about Ethan, only vague family murmurs. He'd gotten into some bad stuff. Nobody ever explained what that meant. Drugs? Petty crime? Something worse? His name was usually followed by a sigh and a careful change of subject. But even with all that, why would he be here? We hadn't told anyone exactly where we'd moved. He had no reason to know. Mark slid the window shut and locked it, then jammed a wooden dowel into the track. He tested it twice, pulling hard. If he's stupid enough to try again, he's not getting through this. That night, I lay in bed listening to every creak, every groan of the old building. Each one sounded like footsteps creeping closer. My pulse wouldn't calm. A week passed. Nothing happened. Slowly, I let myself believe we'd overreacted. Maybe Ethan wasn't watching us. Maybe Mark had only thought he saw him. Maybe it had all been coincidence. Then came Saturday afternoon. I went grocery shopping alone, the way I always did when Mark had extra hours at work. The lot was crowded, sun glaring off windshields. I was bent over, loading bags into the trunk, when I heard it. A whistle. Low. Slow. Familiar. My stomach dropped. I turned, and there he was. Ethan. He leaned against the cart return as though he'd been waiting, his posture casual but his eyes sharp, locked on me. He smiled like we were old friends, like he hadn't just been caught outside our apartment days ago. "Long time no see," he said. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might black out, but I forced my voice steady. "What are you doing here?" He glanced at my belly, smirk tugging at his lips. "Shopping. Looks like you've been busy." "Stay away from me," I snapped, louder than I intended. He lifted his hands in mock surrender, his grin never reaching his eyes. "Relax, just saying hi." But the way he looked at me, it wasn't a greeting. His gaze flicked from me to the open trunk, then back again. Calculating. "Tell Mark I said hello," he added lightly, and then turned, slipping into the maze of parked cars. I stood frozen until my knees buckled. Then I scrambled into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut and locked them. My hands shook so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. I sat there for a full minute before daring to drive away. 3 nights later, Mark was working late. I was in the kitchen making tea, the steam curling around me, when Daisy erupted, deep, frantic barking that shook her whole body. I ran to the living room, heart pounding. Movement. Outside the sliding glass door to our tiny patio, a figure, a shadow. Then, his face, pressed against the glass for a split second. Ethan. I dropped the mug, hot tea splashing across the floor, and grabbed my phone. My fingers were slippery with panic, but I managed to dial 911. My voice shook as I stammered into the phone. "Someone's trying to get in. My husband's not home. Please send someone." By the time the police arrived, Ethan was gone. 2 officers stood in our living room taking notes while Daisy paced, growling, her nails clicking against the floor. I could tell from their looks that they weren't optimistic. "Without proof he's threatening you or catching him in the act, there's not much we can do," one of them said, his tone careful but detached. "We'll file a report, but..." He trailed off. When Mark came home, he found me still shaking, clutching Daisy like she was the only thing keeping me tethered. His face hardened, and that night we made the decision. We were leaving, lease or not. 2 weeks later, we were gone. The new apartment cost more than we could afford, but safety had no price anymore. Harriet didn't even argue when we told her why we were breaking the lease. She just nodded, cigarette in hand, as if she'd expected it all along. I never saw Ethan again. Years later, Mark's sister mentioned he was serving time for something. She didn't say what. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she didn't want to. Even now, I still check the locks at least twice before bed. Sometimes 3. Daisy's gone, and I feel her absence sharpest when I hear a sound outside at night. I tell myself Ethan's far away, locked behind bars. But sometimes in the corner of my eye, I catch movement near a window. Just a flicker. And for that split second, I'm back in that apartment again. 6 months pregnant, paralyzed by fear, staring into the face of someone who should have been family. I never thought of myself as someone who would stumble into dangerous situations. I was cautious to the point of being teased for it, always double-checking the locks, crossing the street if a stranger lingered too long, keeping my head down but my senses sharp. My friends joked that I lived like a character in a crime show, always one step away from dialing 911. But pregnancy rewired me. The instincts hit harder than I ever imagined. Every glance felt sharper, every sound seemed amplified, and every shadow carried a weight it hadn't before, as if my body was screaming at me to guard the life inside. When it happened, I was 23 and 6 months along. I lived in Brookhaven, Massachusetts, a town that prided itself on being safe. It was the kind of place where people waved from their porches and left their front doors unlocked. The grocery clerks greeted you by name, and after dark, the only real noise was the wind rattling through bare branches. Brookhaven sat about 30 miles from the city, where I went 3 nights a week for night classes. I was studying medical billing, not glamorous but practical, a way to make money from home once the baby arrived. Daniel, my boyfriend, worked long shifts at a manufacturing plant an hour away. Between his schedule and our finances, we agreed I'd keep taking the train until we could afford a second car. Money was tight, but we made do. That November was brutal. The air carried a damp chill that clung to your clothes, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and makes your breath curl like smoke. By the time my class ended that night, it was late, and my train rolled into Brookhaven just after midnight. The station was nearly deserted. Just one long platform, a squat brick building locked up after hours, a parking lot with only a few scattered cars, and an empty stretch of road that felt swallowed by darkness. I stepped off, tugging my coat tighter over my belly. The handful of passengers that got off with me drifted quickly toward the lot, leaving me alone under the buzz of a flickering street lamp. My Uber app told me my driver was still 10 minutes away. 10 minutes isn't long, but when you're pregnant, it stretches. It isn't just impatience. It's the ache in your lower back, the heaviness in your legs, the way the cold cuts deeper. I lowered myself onto a bench, shoving my gloved hands into my pockets, scrolling through a pregnancy app to distract myself. Other women posted about swollen ankles, sleepless nights, bizarre cravings. Misery loves company. That's when I noticed her. She sat across the platform on another bench, 30 feet away, hands folded neatly in her lap as though she'd been waiting there all along. Mid to late 30s, pale skin that seemed even paler under the harsh light, hair loose around her shoulders. She wore a thin beige coat, far too light for weather like this. I hadn't seen her get off the train and I'd been paying attention. When our eyes met, it was only for a heartbeat, but something about it made my chest tighten. She stood immediately, like the moment of recognition was all she needed. Her steps were steady, deliberate, not hurried, not hesitant, just as if she already knew where she was going. "Hi," she said. Her voice was flat, mechanical, like she was reciting lines she'd rehearsed. "Hi," I answered, cautious. My voice sounded too small in the empty space. "My car broke down," she said. "Can you help me fix it?" I blinked at her. For a moment I wondered if I'd misheard. The parking lot behind her was empty. Nothing but a scattering of dark shapes. Even if there had been a car, I was visibly pregnant. I could barely bend over without struggling, let alone help fix an engine in the middle of the night. "I'm sorry," I said, forcing a polite smile. "I'm waiting for my ride, and I really can't." "It's just over there," she cut me off, nodding vaguely toward the black stretch of road. "Won't take long." I shook my head, firmer this time. "I can't. I'm 6 months pregnant. I'm not crawling under a car in the cold at midnight." For a second, she didn't react. Then slowly, the corners of her mouth began to curl upward. It wasn't a full smile. It was too thin, too knowing, like she'd been expecting me to say exactly that. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't even human in the way smiles should be. It was calculated, measured, like she'd just discovered something about me and found it funny in a way I wasn't in on. "Oh, I know you're pregnant, Emily." I froze. My name. She'd said my name. The sound of it hit me harder than the November air. I had never seen this woman before in my life. I wasn't wearing a name tag, and my Uber app only ever showed my first initial until the ride actually began. There was no way she could have known. "How do you know my name?" I snapped, my voice suddenly sharper, louder than I intended in the silence of the empty station. She didn't answer. She only tilted her head like she was studying me the way a scientist studies an insect under glass. Her eyes never left mine. 2 weeks, she whispered. The words barely stirred the air. "A girl. She's going to look just like him." My hands moved instinctively to my stomach, cradling it, shielding it. My heart was pounding so violently I could hear it in my ears. "I don't know who you are," I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "But you need to leave me alone." "She'll have your eyes," the woman continued, unblinking, as if she hadn't heard me at all. "And his mouth. But she won't be yours for long, not if you keep making bad choices." The words slid under my skin like ice water. I opened my mouth to tell her to stop, to scream if I had to, but just then, my phone chimed. My Uber had arrived. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my bag and power-walked toward the parking lot, my breath sharp and uneven in the cold. I didn't look back until I was inside the car, the doors locked, the driver asking if I was okay. And when I finally did glance back through the window, she was still there. Standing beneath the flickering lamp, her pale face tilted upward, watching me go. The next morning, my phone was full of missed calls, 11 of them, all from numbers I didn't recognize. The voicemails were worse than silence, just the sound of someone breathing into the receiver, or faint whispers I couldn't quite make out. The texts came too, darker than anything I could have imagined. "You can't keep her from me. We'll see each other again before she's born. Don't make me take her the hard way." I blocked every number, telling myself it was some unhinged coincidence. Maybe she'd overheard my name at the station. Maybe she was bluffing about the rest. But deep down, I knew better. Over the next week, I saw her. Not like that first night, not close enough to speak, but always there. Across the street from my OB/GYN's office, sitting stiffly at a bus stop when I left the pharmacy, standing at the end of the frozen food aisle in the grocery store, eyes locked on me until I turned away. I stopped taking the train after that. I begged rides off classmates, even if it meant waiting in the city for hours until they were ready to head back. Daniel told me I was overreacting. "She's probably just some unstable person who latched onto you," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Once you're not around the station anymore, she'll lose interest. People like that, they get bored." I wanted to believe him. God, I needed to. 3 weeks later, I came home from a prenatal class to find our front door unlocked. Daniel was at work. My heart stopped, but when I stepped inside, nothing looked disturbed. No drawers pulled open, no electronics missing. But on the kitchen table, there it was. A single ultrasound photo. The one I kept folded inside my wallet. It was still warm, like it had just been placed there. I called Daniel, then the police. They dusted for prints, asked me to walk them through the house, scribbled details into a notepad. "Be careful," they told me. "We'll file the report." But nothing came of it. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every car passing by on the street outside made my chest tighten. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my hand pressed over my stomach, whispering promises to the baby that I would keep her safe. In the morning, there was a note slipped under the front door. The handwriting was neat, almost childlike. "You should rest, Emily. You won't be able to sleep much after she's born. I'll make sure of it." After that, I never saw her up close again. But the feeling of being watched never left. Not during my pregnancy. Not after my daughter was born. Even now, years later, I find myself checking the locks 3 times a night, scanning crowds for a thin beige coat. Some nights I still dream of the Brookhaven station, the flickering lamp, and the way she said my name, as if she'd known me my entire life. I never thought my 8th birthday would be spent waiting for a baby I didn't even want. Not just any baby, my mother's baby. Her miracle. Her second chance at doing everything right. At least, that's how she explained it to the women who came for tea in our Upper West Side apartment. They'd lower their voices, glance at her belly, and whisper about how tired she looked. Mom would smile politely, resting one hand over the swell of her stomach like she'd won some prize they all envied. But to me, it didn't feel like a prize. It felt like I was being replaced. Dad insisted we should all be excited because family is everything. But he didn't live here the way I did. He didn't have to deal with Mom's moods shifting like weather, or her endless naps, or the way she fussed over baby clothes, folding them into neat, color-coded piles. When Dad was at work, it was just me, Mom, and whoever she'd hired that month to make sure I didn't get into trouble. This month, it was Gloria. Gloria was the kind of woman who could smile with her mouth, but still make you feel like you'd already done something wrong. She was in her late 40s, wore big gold hoops that swung when she moved, and her sweaters carried the faint smell of laundry detergent, sharp and clean. She followed me from room to room like a shadow, straightening my books or lining up pencils on my desk without asking. One afternoon, when I told her I didn't need a babysitter, she gave me a look, sharp and amused. "Your father's paying me to keep you company," she said, her bracelets clinking as she crossed her arms. "That means you're stuck with me, kid." And she wasn't wrong. Our apartment sat high on the 12th floor, overlooking the park with wide, floor-to-ceiling windows that made the sky feel enormous and impossibly far away. Most kids at school thought it sounded like a dream, but they didn't know it also meant I couldn't go anywhere without permission. Mom didn't like me wandering. Now that she was 8 months pregnant, she wanted me at home as much as possible, tucked inside those glass walls. What made it worse was that my twin brother Aaron wasn't there. He hadn't lived with us since we were 5. The official reason, according to Dad, was special care. Aaron stayed in a residential program upstate, a place with fences, therapists, and locked doors. Dad drove up twice a month to see him, and sometimes he took me along. But Aaron never wanted to talk. He'd sit in the corner of the visiting room, tapping his fingers against his knee, staring past me until the hour was over. Dad always tried to draw him out, his voice forced into cheerfulness that grew thinner as the minutes ticked by. By the end of the visit, his smile would tighten. His words would come out softer, almost defeated. Still, I kept asking to bring Aaron home. I remembered us racing scooters in the courtyard below our building, laughing until Mom leaned out the window to call us in for dinner. I remembered how it felt to be part of something, of us. I missed that. I missed him. But the last time Dad let Aaron stay overnight, everything unraveled. It started with the goldfish tank in the lobby, all the fish floating belly up by morning. Then Maria, the babysitter before Gloria, found a needle buried deep in the couch cushions. A few days later, Mom discovered her prenatal vitamins in the trash, replaced in the bottle with tiny beads from a broken necklace. By the end of the week, Aaron was gone. Now, with the baby only weeks away, Dad said it was too risky to bring him back. The doctors at Aaron's program agreed. Everyone agreed. Everyone except me. Because when Aaron was home, even for just a little while, things were different. Mom actually looked at me. She'd touch my shoulder, smile at me, and say things like, "See, this is how a good boy behaves." And even if it wasn't true, even if it was only for those moments, I felt like I belonged again. And sometimes, when Aaron was home, she would smile at me in that rare way she used to. Before the baby. Before all of it. When he wasn't around, though, I had to carry that weight alone. I had to be the good boy, the one who didn't cause trouble, who made things easy. That was when I started thinking about the baby. The first time I ever heard the word poison was in one of Dad's true crime documentaries. He thought I wasn't paying attention, but I was. I remember the detective on TV saying it slow, like the word itself was too heavy to carry. It stuck with me. It wasn't that I wanted to kill anyone. Not really. I just wanted things to go back to how they used to be. Before the baby, before Gloria shadowed me everywhere, before Aaron was sent away. If the baby never arrived, then Mom wouldn't be so busy. She'd have time for me again. Maybe Aaron could even come home more often. That was all I wanted. "Stop pacing," Gloria muttered one afternoon as I wore a path near the dining table. She was making tea for Mom, humming a song I didn't recognize. "I'm not pacing," I said. "You're wearing out the rug. Sit." I sat, but my mind didn't. It kept running, faster and faster. "Gloria," I asked after a moment, "can babies get sick before they're born?" Her hands paused over the kettle just for a second. Then, carefully, "Sometimes." "Why?" I shrugged, trying to look casual. "Just wondering." She looked at me longer than necessary, her eyes sharp in a way that made my stomach twist. "Your mom's fine. The baby's fine. You don't need to worry about that." I didn't answer. I just kept the thought tucked away. The night I decided, the apartment felt too quiet. Mom had gone to bed early, her room lit by the dim glow of a bedside lamp. Dad was in Boston for a business trip. Gloria sat in the kitchen scrolling through her phone, her face pale blue in the screen's light. The pantry door was half open. I slipped inside, my pulse hammering, and scanned the shelves. I didn't even know what I was searching for. Something that could make someone sick but not kill them outright. Something that wouldn't be obvious. My eyes flicked toward the cabinet under the sink, where I knew the bleach sat in its harsh plastic bottle. That seemed too strong, too dangerous, too easy for someone to notice. Then I saw it, a box of powdered cleaner, the kind Mom used to scrub the sink. White, fine, almost like flour. I poured some into a napkin, folded it tightly, and slipped it into my hoodie pocket. My palms were slick with sweat. My heart wouldn't slow down. The next morning, Mom asked for oatmeal. Gloria made it, stirring the pot with one hand while talking over her shoulder. I sat at the counter, a comic book open in front of me, pretending to read. When the phone rang, Gloria stepped away. That was my moment. My hand shook as I unfolded the napkin. A thin stream of white powder fell into the steaming oatmeal, vanishing as soon as it touched. I stirred it in quickly, then pushed the bowl back into place, my chest burning from holding my breath. Gloria came back, lifted the tray, and carried it into Mom's room. I waited. I expected something immediate, coughing, choking, some dramatic collapse. But nothing happened. Mom ate her breakfast in bed, thanked Gloria softly, and spent the rest of the day reading like nothing was wrong. That night, I lay awake, ears straining for any sound from her room. Nothing. It was 2 days later when it happened. I woke to Gloria's voice, sharp and panicked. I ran to the hallway and found her pacing with the phone pressed to her ear. Mom lay on the bed, pale, drenched in sweat, one hand clutching her stomach. "Stay out of the way," Gloria snapped when she saw me. The paramedics arrived quickly. Their voices were urgent but calm as they lifted Mom onto a stretcher. I heard one of them murmur about possible preterm distress and fetal heart rate. Dad met us at the hospital, his face drawn tight. He didn't even look at me. He went straight to Mom's side. Hours passed. I sat in the waiting area, my feet not touching the floor, staring at the speckled tiles. No one told me anything. Finally, Dad came out. His eyes looked heavy, his voice clipped. "Your sister's going to be okay," he said. "But your mom needs to stay here for a few days. She had some complications." That was all. That night I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with a feeling I couldn't name. Relief, because Mom was still alive. Disappointment, because the baby was still coming. Mom would still be busy. Aaron would still be gone. Nothing had changed, but one thing had become clear. I could try again, and next time I wouldn't make the same mistake.